Well, welcome back to the second in the series of the Spirit of Mayflower, to this special little preview episode. And there's so much I need to share with you. There's such a lot that's happened since the end of the last season, lots of sculptures. But before we get into that, I'm going to introduce my guest for today, Mick Jenkinson, singer, songwriter and poet. Welcome to the podcast, Mick.
Thanks. Nice to be here, Rachel, and nice to make your acquaintance finally, since we've only spoken remotely in the past.
Yes, and you're, well, as the introduction says, you're a singer and songwriter and poet, and one of the pieces that you've written is actually going to be our season jingle. So we've just heard a little tiny clip, and we're going to hear the full version a little later on. So just tell us a little bit about you and your songwriting and some of the projects that you've been involved in.
Yeah, well, I guess the most relevant part, Rachel, is how this song came about. But I do a lot of work with Right Up Our Street. You know, the arts. It's a Doncaster-based organisation that exists to promote the arts in the local area. And I'd worked with them for several years, and I think just in conversation they said, well, you've never done a project of your own. You've always done stuff for other people. And so I put together this. So I guess it's more than a songwriting project. It was a project to explore Doncaster stories. And I think our premise was the fact that as a town, Doncaster doesn't shout enough about its glories and about its past in particular, the past and present, I suppose. But so we just set about as I suppose as an exercise, as a project, unearthing stories and ran a bunch of workshops, and people came forward with their own stories. Of course, one of the the prevalent stories is the Pilgrim Fathers. I mean, so it's a big thing, and there are a lot of people in Doncaster that genuinely aren't aware of it. As with the Sandhouse and a lot of other things in Doncaster.
Yeah.
So, as far as we could do our bit towards putting that right, we set about writing songs to cover those areas. I was working with a poet called Ian Parks, who was a fantastic, nationally recognised poet. It was an honour for me. I mean, I'm a songwriter. I've always written my own lyrics, but Ian is so good that I was quite happy to pass that side of it over to him. And I'd provide the musical input, he'd provide the lyrical input. And he came up with the Promised Land. I mean, obviously we didn't want these songs to be didactic. We didn't want to be just telling narrative stories. You always look to find an angle and get inside a story so you can engage people with the song. And just the idea of the Promised Land, I mean, is a universal theme. I mean, obviously it harks back to the sailing of the Mayflower, but we've all got these. The Promised Land at the moment is being able to go to the pub, isn't it? That's. So Ian wrote these snippets of verses about. We focused on, because of the Doncaster Tales, we focused on the Austerfield connection rather than the Scrooby connection. William and Dorothy Bradford, and really new. Sometimes sometimes you write a song and it needs working on, or you think it's maybe a fringe interest. We knew straight away we'd got something that people could latch onto, something that people would sing along with. And it's a song we're immensely proud of. When you've got that sort of chorus that people are going to go away humming it after they've heard it. My first test is that I do it. My first test of my songs is I write a melody, and if I can't remember that melody the following day, it probably wasn't very good. And I knew as soon as I wrote Promised Land, I woke up singing it. So that's where. And we produced an album called Songs of Our Town. It's still available. Obviously, we don't promote. We haven't been promoting it for the last year because we've been locked down like everybody else. But the songs we've written took on a lot of currency. We got a local artist to do us the artwork. Everything we tried to engage everything about the album. We tried to make local. So we ran workshops for local people to bring their stories forward. And this album, Songs of Our Town, is something that I've been in music for a lot of years, and it's probably the thing I'm most proud of. And Promised Land closes the album. It's the final song on the album.
Right. The way how you describe sort of delving into your project, I can see a lot of similarities with my own. And because when I started my Mayflower project, you know, I knew I wanted to come from the female narrative, but I just wasn't sure which direction it was going to take, whether it was looking at a specific woman or the women in general.
Yeah.
And you do have to kind of immerse yourself into that world, don't you? And it's very strange how things that was happening 400 years ago are happening now. You know, like, you know, the promised land is going to the pub and seeing your friends and loved ones and doing all the things that we used to take for granted that we can no longer do. And there's so many of things that mirror what was happening in the past that's happening today. So it's quite strange, isn't it, when that happens?
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah. That's what a good universal theme does, and really that's why, you know, people that know the history of the Pilgrim Fathers, there were people already there, but the Pilgrim Fathers story became the founding narrative of America.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the reasons was it resonates with people, doesn't it?
It does. You know, making that fantastic journey, being so wholeheartedly believing in, you know, in your almost like a quest to travel that vast wide open ocean. And
yeah, I mean, it was everything that we look for in adventure and escape, all rolled up together.
Yes.
And some of it is, we know some of it's mythical, we know some of it's a little bit exaggerated, and but the sheer power of the narrative has carried it through for hundreds of years, and it's not going to go away now, is it? It is.
No.
It is the narrative of the founding of America.
It is, yeah, and I agree. History does become embellished with different things, or the different historians take on retelling that narrative. But yes, there's certain things that just ring true throughout, and that was that willpower to follow this path that they believed that they should be doing. So I think this is a great time to maybe have a little musical interlude. Have you got your guitar to hand, Mick?
I have indeed, Rachel. It's right here and nicely tuned too.
Wonderful. So we're going to hear The Promised Land.
Crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. We are crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. I'm William Bradford from Austerfield. On the windswept deck I stand, with a pocket full of wheat seeds and a Bible in my hand. I am crossing the wide green ocean till we reach the promised land. I'm crossing the wide green ocean till we reach the promised land. We are crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. I am Dorothy Bradford from Austerfield. On the sea-blown deck I stand, with salty water in my hair, holding my husband's hand. Though I cross the wide green ocean, I will not see the promised land. Though I cross the wide green ocean, I will not see the promised land. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. William Button, still a child, I'm rolling on the swell. My playmates left in Austerfield, where I used to dwell. And though I cross the wide green ocean, I will not see the promised land. Though I cross the wide green ocean, I will not see the promised land. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. We are sailing on the Mayflower, with Yorkshire folk we're manned, to start a new life on the shore, to make a pilgrim stand. We are crossing the wide green ocean till we reach the promised land. We are crossing the wide green ocean till we reach the promised land. We are crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. We're crossing the great ocean, we are riding on the tide, with a cargo full of hopes and dreams and 100 souls inside. 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 And 100 souls inside.
Well, thank you for performing that for us, Mick. And can you tell us the female vocals? Who was that artist?
Yes, it was Sharon Richards, who runs choirs in Doncaster. As I was saying before, you know, we wanted everybody involved in this album to have a local connection, and very often an artistic connection with other projects we've been involved in. And so, you know, the backing musicians, the female vocals. Sharon, well, you've heard it. I don't think I need to tell you. She's got a marvelous voice, and it made me feel. I've never sung much with. I've sung in bands, but they've always been all male bands. I've never sung with a female voice before we recorded this.
Oh, really?
And I loved it. I loved Sharon's voice, and I loved the way it worked with mine. It made me. It's another one that I keep saying I'm proud. It is another one of the things that made me proud of the recording was just the way those vocals came together. Technically, she's a far better singer than me. She as choir singers tend to be. She hits the notes, she hits perfect harmonies, and she made me sound better than I probably am as well.
Well, it's great to have a project where it's so rooted in the community. And my own project, the making of Pilgrim Woman Doncaster, she was installed just before Christmas, and you know, it was quite an experience watching her arrive. But at the beginning of that project, I launched the 50 Women project, and I was trying to find local women to come and get engaged, and we ended up with over 100 taking part in weaving activities. And now all of those woven samples are now featured on the Pilgrim Woman, and I can't wait for the new Downham Gallery, which stands in the very centre of Doncaster, to open its doors in the summer so everybody can go in and take a look. So I know that with some of your other poetry projects that you've been working with another group who have agreed to provide a couple of poems for this season, and that's a group called Lippy Women, a group of female poets from the Doncaster area, and you work quite a bit with them as well, don't you?
Yeah, it's a group called Read to Write, and I mentioned Ian Parks, my songwriting partner. He's the mentor, so he acts as a teacher, and the essence of the group, as its name implies, was to I suppose answer the question of, well, if I want to be a writer, who should I read? Where do I take the inspiration from? So Ian's thing was to introduce us all to writers, and these may be poets, they may be narrative stories, and use that as an inspiration and as a springboard for our own writing. Lippy Women is the female offshoot of Read to Write, because they wanted a focus for women's, for female related activities. So next we're doing a reading for International Women's Day, and it will be Lippy Women led, not led by the male contingent of the group. So yeah, and they're a good cohort of people to have on board for yourself, Rachel, because they're full of energy, full of creativity, and they'll come up with they're looking for stories to write about. They will come up with the goods for you.
Yeah, well, I know that some of the group have been listening to season 1 of the podcast, and in particular the when I did my diary readings for the first few episodes, which covered the period of time when I travelled across the Atlantic in a freight ship whilst reading William Bradford's diary, and I got a couple, Wynne and Ella Pritchard, and they provided imagined letters and little musical pieces throughout season 1, but Wynne actually agreed to be the voice of William Bradford, and so it was really nice to I was reading out my diary, and then I had Wynne reading out the parts of William Bradford, and I think that worked quite well. And I know the group have been listening to those and sort of to set the scene and to get inspired for their poems, so I can't wait to be able to share some of these poetry pieces, which will be read by them themselves throughout this season. So we're going to have a mixture of songwriting and poetry peppered throughout season 2 of this podcast. So I'm really looking forward to working with you all.
Yeah, and ditto, because it was part of our project for the end of 2019 into 2020, and of course, the focus for all that creative work was going to be the planned Mayflower celebrations last year, and I suppose we all had the rug pulled out from under things we were trying to achieve, didn't we? So it would be nice to get some of that focus back, use that energy. I mean, obviously it's still relevant. The fact that the 2020 celebrations were postponed doesn't detract from the fact that the story is still worth celebrating. You've just got to find a different way of doing it now, haven't we?
Yes, and celebrating that local connection and Doncaster's roots, and so there's just such a lot to unpick there, and that's going to be one of the narratives that's running through this next season. I can officially announce that I'm going to be making a third Pilgrim Woman. So currently we have Pilgrim Woman Doncaster and Pilgrim Woman Gainsborough. So they're 2 bronze sculptures of the Pilgrim Woman that I designed and created. And this year I'm going to be working on a third one. It's going to be going to Boston, and that's another very interesting part of the story, because people that fled from the Doncaster area and the North Notts area travelled through Lincolnshire, through Gainsborough, and then out towards Boston to flee when they was trying to get over to the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So it's another interesting part of the story that I'm itching to unpick. I'm hoping to be able to get to the jail at Boston, where some of the separatists was held, tour around some of the sites, maybe talking to people that are in the Boston, USA, as well as Boston, UK, sort of get that sort of both sides there. And I'd like to be able to talk to other artists, regional artists that have also done Mayflower projects. So there's quite a lot that I'm going to try and cram in to season 2 of the podcast.
Sounds like you've got your work cut out, Rachel.
It really does. So, Mick, I would just like to thank you for being part of this special preview on International Women's Day, and I can't wait to release the next season of the podcast. So if you're listening to this, do look out for the season start, and make sure you subscribe. And Mick, if there's anybody that's interested in finding more about your singer-songwriting or your poetry, is there any links that you could share with us that they could check that out?
Yeah, certainly the Read to Write Facebook page, and I can be contacted through that page. Or indeed, if people want to drop me a direct, I don't mind people having my email address. If anybody wants to drop me a line and you begin a conversation about the issues we've raised, it's m.jenkinson@blueyonder.co.uk. Certainly if people that want to get involved in the poetry scene in Doncaster, or as I said, they're interested specifically in this sort of narrative songwriting thread, then I'm looking for connections all the time, so please get in touch.
Lovely, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. So so I'm looking forward to hearing some more of your musical outputs and your poetry throughout the next season. So thank you once again, Mick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Rachel.